We're out at a farm today where we received a call from the landowner about some beaver that are causing some property damage. So along the stream behind me, there's a series of dams in a stair-step fashion that build up the water level as it moves upstream. And beaver are a keystone species. That means that they have a greater than expected impact on their environment. And when they build dams in places where they're not causing any property damage, they create habitat for many, many species. And so when they're not bothering anything, they're a really cool species to have around. But when they get into farm ponds, or when their dams flood property, or when they cut trees down that people care about, then that causes property damage, and that adds up to millions of dollars in property damage every year in the US. And when that happens, then we need to have a way to take care of that damage or take care of the species. Sometimes when beaver are just flooding things with their dams, we can use non-lethal methods to stop that flooding and let the beaver maintain a pond. We can also exclude beaver from trees sometimes. But when they get into pond dams like they have here upstream, they damage the structural integrity of the dam by burrowing into it. Then those burrows can cave in and we can have a failure of that dam. And so beaver are not recommended to be in farm ponds. At this property, I'm going to demonstrate some ways that you can be successful at removing beaver when they cause problems on your property. So the key to any successful trapping program is having the right equipment and identifying good locations for your trap sets. With beaver, we're looking for sign that might include tracks, chewed sticks, chewing on existing trees, actual dens going into the bank, trails, dams, and those sorts of things. We also may see castor mounds that the beaver have created where they pushed up mud and vegetation and excreted their castor on that. My trap of choice when I'm trapping beaver is actually a simple cable snare. The main reason I like these snares is we can be, of course, very effective with them, but we do not need to put on chest waders, get out into the water to set them. This is a great example of the snares that I use for snaring beaver. We have what's called a cam lock here that's the locking device. If you have a trapped beaver or if this just closes and you need to reopen it, if you push like this, it's not going to open. But if I bring that lower piece of the cam, that hinge back, then I can push the cable back through it. On these snares that I build, we have a swivel that keeps the cable from kinking after we've caught a beaver. This also allows us to have a determined opening size for our snare. So if we open these snares all the way up, our opening is about 8 inches. Which is the right size for snaring beaver. We also have a piece of rubber tubing on there that fits nicely over the wire that we're going to support our snare with. And then of course we have another length of cable that we can tie off somewhere. And always don't forget, we need to have a tag on our trap with our contact information in case someone finds that. That's a legal requirement in the state of Kansas and most other states. So that's our snare. To support the snare, we want to have wire. I prefer to use 9-gauge annealed wire. We can cut this and then bend a length into a shape that will support our snare. We also need to be able to anchor our snare. I anchor snares in a couple of different ways. The easiest way that's most accessible to the most people is either going to be to loop this end of the snare around a solid object. So what we would do is wrap the snare around that object, pass the snare loop back through, and then tighten that down against our object that's holding it. That solid object could be a tree that's at least 3 or 4 inches in diameter at the base. It could be a fence post that we drive into the ground. I also will sometimes use some sort of earth anchor device where we have a cable or chain attached to a piece of metal. We use a driver to drive that anchor down into the ground, and then once that's in the ground, we pull up on it and now we've got a solid piece of metal, and we can hold beaver even in pretty soft mud with that sort of anchoring device. The final way that I like to anchor snares is using what I call a snare pole. So this is just a 4-foot length of 1/2 inch smooth steel rod. It has some of our 9-gauge annealed wire welded to form a loop at the top that we can tie our snare through. And then we also have our 9-gauge wire there to act as our support for our snare. And this is just pounded down into the ground firmly. One of the important keys for success in trapping any animal, and especially beaver, is selecting a trap location that's upwind to where the animal's going to be traveling. So I've picked this side because the wind's coming from behind me and it's going to push the smells that we're going to put here across the pond where the beaver are going to be traveling. At this site, I'm going to demonstrate how to make a Castor mound set. This is my favorite set to make because the Castor basically mimics an intruder in the beaver's territory, and that gets them excited. So they're definitely going to come check it out, and we can dig a notch that's going to funnel them right through a snare while they're coming into that Castor mound to check it out. So I'm going to use my tile spade to push some mud out of the way, dig some mud out of the way, and create a trough. The edge of this pond is pretty shallow, so I'm having to dig a long trough. I want to dig it fairly deep so that the beaver is actually swimming up to the snare and swimming through the snare rather than walking. I want to have my trough at least where the snare is going to be in the trough. I want it to be about 6 or 8 inches wide so that it's just wide enough to accommodate my snare. As I'm digging that trough out, I can use the mud that comes out to basically guide the beaver where I want him to go as well. I'm just walking through the trough here to make sure that it's deep enough that I've gotten all the obstructions out of the way. Now I'm going to use my spade to dig up some of the loose mud and rotten vegetation from the bottom of the pond to make a fake Castor mound right above the trough. To secure our snare, we want to make sure that we tie the extension cable onto the end of the snare just by connecting the 2 loops and forming a square knot, making sure we don't have any hardware caught in between. And at this location, I'm tying off to a T-post that was close by. That's a good sturdy way to tie off a snare, and a T-post is something that's accessible at just about any farm that we might want to trap beaver at. To support our snare, we're going to take our number 9 annealed wire, build a U shape in the bottom, and then fold the tag side of that over, push that down into the mud, and then we're going to bend a Z shape into that support wire so that we can adjust the height and also adjust how far out over our trough the snare hangs. To attach the snare, we're going to slide our tubing over the top of that wire, get it firmly secured on there. And then we're going to make sure that there's no obstructions in the bottom of our trough before we push the snare down and place that snare so that the bottom is just above the bottom of our trough. Then our last step is to apply some of our heavy Castor-based lure to the Castor mound. We want somewhere between a tablespoon and a golf ball sized glob of that stuff on there. We can leave our stick on top of the Castor mound, and then we'll splash a little bit of water over that Castor lure to get that smell going out into the pond where the beaver's going to smell it as he comes by. And that's our completed Castor mound set with a snare. When we're attracting critters to a set with smells, it's always good to use a couple of different kinds of smells. And so we can basically create the same set that we did with the Castor mound, but instead of creating a Castor mound, we're going to use a baited stick with food lure placed on it to attract the beaver through our snare. So I've peeled a fresh stick. I'm just going to push it down into the mud where our Castor mound would have been on the other set. I'm taking some of the shavings that I created when I peeled that stick with my pocket knife, and then I'm going to put some food lure on this stick that's going to create a strong smell that the beaver's going to want to investigate, and that's going to blow over the pond and attract him through our snare. And here we use some of the mud that came out of the trough as a backing behind the baited stick just to enforce that the beaver should come through the way we want him to. All right, so here we have a location where the beaver have dammed up the creek. We have a nice wet area coming over the top of the dam. There are beaver tracks. It's really a trail coming down through here. We've got a good depression right in the middle of this wet place that forms into a trail on the other side that's connecting these two different pools that the beaver have created. So this makes a nice location for what we call a blind set. So this set, we're going to use our handy dandy snare pole to anchor and support our snare. And I'm going to come back a little ways from the edge of our dam, push this snare pole down into the mud as far as I can. I'm hitting something fairly solid here. If that ends up being bedrock, I may have to move and set it in a different spot. We're gonna see if we can pound that down through there. I really like these snare poles because they give both an anchor point for our snare and a way to support the snare easily, all in one. All right, so this happens every once in a while. We've actually pounded our snare pole down into a rock, but I can't budge this baby, so it's not going anywhere. We're gonna leave that as is. It will hold the beaver just fine. My support wire needs to be lined up about there. And I'm gonna grab my snare. So I'm wrapping the cable around the pole and through the loop of wire that I've created there. I'm gonna come in, put my rubber tubing firmly onto my support wire. We're pushing down pretty hard on the bottom right there. We don't want to have quite that much pressure on it. That's centered up nicely in this depressed area where the beaver are swimming through, and I'm happy with that. We're not going to catch other critters in these types of snare sets. It's going to be the beaver. You might catch an occasional otter. One of the challenges with using body gripping traps during the warmer months is we sometimes catch a lot of snapping turtles once they wake up. And setting snares this way, that alleviates that problem for us. So that's our completed blind trail set in a beaver run. All right, so we set traps yesterday. We're back out here to check them today. And in the blind trail set that we made with the snare yesterday, we have a beaver. Another style of trap that's commonly used for beaver is the body gripping trap. So the size of trap that we typically use for a beaver, the number would be a 330. This is gonna be somewhere between a 10 by 10 and 10 by 11, or maybe even 11 by 11 or 10 by 12 size trap. So the parts of this trap are the trigger. I like to bend the triggers on these traps into a U shape. That lines the beaver's head up. He doesn't have to push on those trigger wires with his sensitive nose. The top of the trigger is going to straddle one of our jaws, and it has a notch in it that the dog on the other side will engage the trigger and the jaw at the same time. With these traps, any body gripping trap that has two springs, we're going to have safeties of some kind. That allows us to compress the springs, lock the safety in place, and then move to the next spring and lock it in place. That also allows us to be safe with these traps when they're set, but not in place yet. So we can leave those safeties on, and if the trap did spring on us, we would only get part of the power from the trap and it wouldn't break bones. An important piece of equipment for using body gripping traps, especially the size of body gripping traps that we trap beaver with, are setting tongs. These are aluminum, so they're a little bit lighter. These can be purchased at trap supply houses. And so to set this trap, we're going to engage those setting tongs into the loops on the springs that hold the jaw. We're going to compress the spring, hold the tong with our offhand, engage our safety, then repeat that process on the other side. And when we do that, we need to make sure that we don't get the tongs in the way of our safety, because that makes things just a lot more complicated. Sometimes I use my body to help me when I'm doing this. All right, we'll get our tongs out of the way. Our next step in this process is to line are springs up on the hinges of the trap. Those hinges are at the halfway point of the trap. That's an important thing to know, because for a legal set in Kansas with this size of trap, at least half of the gripping portion must be submerged. So if the hinge here is in the water, then you know it's a legal set. So when I set these, I use my body. I'll take my hands, push up against my body with those trap jaws, compress the jaws. Now I flip the dog over and engage the trigger like so. Now this trap is set. There are a lot of ways to stabilize a body gripping trap for beaver. Many people will push sticks down in between the springs. When I was a kid, that's how I did it. But now I prefer to use a stabilizer, a trap stabilizing device. So these H frames basically fit in between the springs on each side. Now to get the second upright of our stabilizer through the jaws, we do have to take that safety loose, but now I'm going to put it back on. And now to place this trap in the stabilizer, we're just going to apply even pressure to both sides of the trap and firmly press it until the hinges are down at the bottom of our H. The last part of this process is to close the top, engage these hooks, and now we can firmly press the frame down into the mud, and that will stabilize our trap. Once we have the trap in place, it's important to remember to move those safeties so that we have the full power of the trap when a beaver swims through and is caught. These traps are very effective, but they do take a fair bit of hand strength and some knowledge to set. And so that's one of the reasons that when I'm teaching folks who haven't trapped before, that I tend to favor the snares. The nice thing about a body gripping trap is it's lethal and it kills the beaver nearly instantly. So it's definitely a form of euthanasia. And if we're in a city where we can't discharge firearms, as long as this trap can be totally submerged, then this may be a better option for trapping beaver in an urban area. This trap is best suited for sets in den entrances, at bank dens, or at lodges. We can also set them in beaver channels as long as we have enough water to get enough of the trap submerged. So we've got a bank den going into this real steep bank. Bank dens are a good place to use a body gripping trap. When we're setting these bank dens, we need to have fairly tall waders because we'll be out in the water. I can feel there's a little depression right in the center of this bank den. So I'm going to line this trap up in the center, keep it square with the opening, and push it all the way down as far as I can. I'm going to grab the jaws, push on them a little bit. Now that's good and sturdy. Just going to bring the spring out to guide him a little bit. He should want to go through the center of the trap anyway. Now I'll take my cable. I'm just going to loop that cable through this stand. This dogwood makes a great tie-off point. I'll just bring this up top so that it's not down in the way. And that's our completed set in a bank den for a beaver. So those are simple and effective techniques for trapping and removing problem beaver. I do not recommend relocating problem wildlife. I recommend euthanizing them. If you'd like more information about why I don't recommend relocating wildlife, please check out the translocation episode of the podcast Fins, Fur, and Feathers, which you can find anywhere that you like to get your podcast information. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more information on wildlife management.